wake up one morning and realize that time has moved forward without asking your permission. Your body is older, your routines more rigid, your reactions strangely predictable. You tell yourself you are better now, that what hurt you belongs to the past. You use that word, past, like a locked door, closed, finished, safe. And yet, something betrays you, a sound, a look, a tone of voice, a sudden silence in a room, a message that arrives too late or not at all. Your chest tightens before your mind can explain why. Your breath shortens. Your body reacts as if something ancient has returned, something it recognizes instantly, long before thought intervenes. You pause. You wonder, why does this still have power over me? You were told that trauma is something you overcome, something you defeat, something you leave behind like a bad chapter in a book you no longer read. Society loves this narrative. It is clean, optimistic, marketable, heal, move on, be stronger, turn pain into a lesson, turn wounds into wisdom, turn survival into a success story. But what if that story is incomplete? What if the very idea of overcoming trauma is part of the problem? Because here is the uncomfortable contradiction. If trauma were truly in the past, your body would not react in the present. If it were truly gone, it would not shape your choices, your relationships, your fears, your ambitions. If it were finished, it would not whisper to you in moments of calm or scream inside you when you least expect it. So why does it? Why does something that ended continue to live? This is the question most people avoid. Not because it lacks answers, but because the answers destabilize everything they believe about healing, strength, and identity. You were never taught to ask it. From a young age, you learned a subtle rule. Pain is acceptable only if it is temporary. Sadness is tolerated only if it resolves quickly. Suffering must justify itself by producing growth. If it lingers, if it repeats, if it refuses to disappear on schedule, it becomes inconvenient, embarrassing, something to hide. So you learn to hide it from others and eventually from yourself. You learn to say, I'm fine. You learn to function. You learn to adapt. And adaptation, when repeated long enough, begins to look like personality. Here is another paradox no one warned you about. Trauma doesn't survive by staying visible. It survives by becoming normal. It dissolves into habits, into reactions that feel automatic, into beliefs that feel like just the way I am. You don't feel traumatized. You feel cautious. You feel detached. You feel responsible for everyone's emotions but your own. You feel uncomfortable with closeness or addicted to it. You feel restless when things are calm. You feel uneasy when nothing is wrong. You call this intuition or independence or maturity. But what if it is memory, working without your permission? Not memory as a story you can tell, but memory as a pattern your nervous system refuses to forget. This is where the illusion begins. You are told that healing means erasing the wound, that freedom means no longer feeling its presence, that strength means being unaffected by what once broke you. And so you measure your progress by absence. Do I still hurt? Do I still react? Do I still feel afraid? Every yes feels like failure. But trauma does not operate on the timeline your mind prefers. It does not live in language. It does not respond to logic. It is stored in sensation, in posture, in breath, in expectation. It lives where words arrive too late. So you do what most people do. You try harder. You analyze yourself. You intellectualize your past. You read. You reflect. You understand. And still, your body flinches. Still, your emotions surge without warning. Still, you repeat patterns you swore you had outgrown. At some point, a darker question appears, usually late at night, usually unspoken. What if I'm broken in a way that cannot be fixed? This thought terrifies you, so you push it away. You replace it with productivity, with self-improvement, with spiritual language, with distraction. Anything that promises an endpoint, anything that says, one day this will be over. But what if that endpoint does not exist? What if trauma is not an enemy to defeat, but a reality to be metabolized? This idea alone feels dangerous because it threatens the fantasy of a final cure. It challenges the hope that one day you will wake up untouched, clean, reset. It forces a more disturbing possibility into view, that trauma is not something you have, but something that has shaped the way you are. And yet, this is not a sentence to despair. It is an invitation to rethink everything. If trauma cannot be erased, what does healing actually mean? If it cannot be overcome, what does freedom look like? If it continues to live inside you, is it a parasite or a message? These questions unsettle because they imply responsibility of a different kind. Not the responsibility to get rid of your pain, but the responsibility to understand how it organizes your inner world, how it chooses what feels safe, how it decides what feels familiar, how it whispers instructions your conscious mind never agreed to. You begin to see the outlines of something deeper, something rarely discussed without euphemism: trauma as an internal structure, a lens, a silent architect. And once you sense this, you can no longer unsee it. You notice how certain situations drain you disproportionately, how certain people feel magnetic in ways you cannot explain, how certain fears feel exaggerated, while others feel strangely absent. You notice how your body anticipates danger before your mind can justify it. You notice how calm sometimes feels suspicious. This is not weakness, it is adaptation. At some point in your life, these responses kept you alive. They reduced pain, they preserved connection, they created order where chaos reigned. They were intelligent solutions to unbearable conditions. But intelligence does not equal timelessness. What once protected you may now limit you. What once helped you survive may now define the borders of your existence. And this is where the real tension begins, not between you and your past, but between who you had to become and who you are still allowed to be. You feel it as a pressure you cannot name, a sense that something inside you wants to move, to loosen, to breathe differently, but doesn't know how. You sense that the language of overcoming has failed you, yet you don't know what replaces it. Not yet. Because before anything can change, one illusion must be dismantled. And it is the most seductive one of all, the belief that healing means becoming someone who was never hurt. In the next part, we will go deeper into where this belief comes from, psychologically, philosophically, culturally, and why it keeps so many people trapped in an endless cycle of self-blame, disguised as self-improvement. For now, sit with the question that refuses to disappear. It does not begin with the traumatic event itself, not with the loss, the neglect, the violence, the abandonment, the humiliation, or the fear that once overwhelmed you. Those moments were the spark, not the system. What truly shapes your inner life was forged afterward, in the silent negotiations you made with reality in order to survive it. Imagine this instead: a younger version of you standing in a world that suddenly became unpredictable. Something essential was missing: safety, attunement, protection, consistency, love. Your nervous system didn't ask why. It asked only one question: what must I become so this never happens again? That question is the hidden root. Psychology rarely presents trauma this way. We speak of symptoms, disorders, coping mechanisms, but beneath all of it lies a more unsettling truth. Trauma reorganizes identity, not consciously, not symbolically, but structurally. Carl Jung warned that what is not made conscious becomes fate. Trauma is the most efficient manufacturer of unconscious fate there is. It does not merely hurt you, it trains you. It teaches your body what to expect, your emotions what to fear, your mind what to avoid. Over time, these lessons crystallize into what feels like me. This is why trauma is so difficult to overcome. You are not fighting a memory, You are questioning a worldview your nervous system depends on. Think about it. If the world once proved unsafe, your psyche adapts by becoming vigilant. If love once felt conditional, you adapt by earning it. If closeness once led to pain, you adapt by controlling distance. None of these adaptations feel pathological from the inside. They feel reasonable, necessary, even virtuous. Here lies the philosophical trap. Modern culture romanticizes resilience. Nietzsche spoke of becoming stronger through suffering, but his warning is often ignored. Strength built unconsciously can harden into rigidity. What begins as resilience can become armor, and armor worn too long cuts off sensation, including joy. You are praised for being strong, but no one asks what that strength cost you. Trauma thrives in this silence. From a neurological perspective, trauma embeds itself below language. The amygdala, the insula, the vagus nerve. These systems do not care about your insights or affirmations. They care about patterns. They scan relentlessly for resemblance. Not logic, but similarity. Not truth, but familiarity. This is why you can know something intellectually and still react as if nothing has changed. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that humans are condemned to freedom, that we must choose ourselves again and again. Trauma complicates this idea because trauma creates choices that feel non-negotiable, automatic, pre-selected. You do not decide to flinch. You do not decide to freeze. You do not decide to people please, dissociate, overfunction, underfeel.
These decisions were made long before you had language for them. Freedom, in this context, becomes terrifying. If these patterns are not just who you are, then who are you without them? This is the deeper fear few acknowledge. Trauma is not only painful, it is organizing. It gives structure, predictability, identity. Removing it without understanding feels like standing without gravity. Arthur Schopenhauer believed suffering was woven into the fabric of existence. But trauma teaches a more specific lesson. Suffering can become familiar enough to feel safer than uncertainty. Pain you recognize feels less dangerous than peace you do not trust. This is why many people unconsciously resist healing, not because they enjoy pain, but because pain has become navigable terrain. The unknown feels worse. Here, society intervenes in the worst possible way. Instead of teaching integration, it teaches performance. Instead of listening to the body, it demands narratives of triumph. Instead of patience, it prescribes speed. You are told to move on, as if moving were a purely cognitive act, as if your nervous system were not still standing guard at the gates of your perception. Viktor Frankl wrote that meaning can be found even in suffering, but meaning is not the same as bypassing. When meaning is used to avoid feeling, it becomes another layer of repression, another way trauma hides. This is the hidden problem. Trauma is misunderstood as an experience rather than a relationship between your past and your present, between sensation and interpretation, between survival and identity. You are not haunted because something went wrong. You are haunted because something went right once. Your system adapted successfully. It kept you alive. It minimized damage. It learned fast, too fast. And now it refuses to unlearn without proof that the world has fundamentally changed. But proof is not rational. It is experiential. And here lies the philosophical rupture. Healing cannot be achieved by eliminating trauma because trauma is not an object. It is a lens, a filter, a mode of being in the world. Trying to remove it is like trying to remove your eyes to change how you see. This is why so many healing journeys feel circular. You revisit the same insights. You feel temporary relief. Then the patterns return, not because you failed, but because you were never addressing the right level. The goal was never erasure. The goal, though rarely stated this way, is renegotiation. A renegotiation between the part of you that learned to survive and the part of you that wants to live. Between a nervous system trained for danger and a reality that may no longer require such constant defense. Between an identity built in reaction and a self that has not yet been allowed to emerge. But this renegotiation comes at a cost. It requires grieving who you had to become. It requires questioning traits you were once praised for. It requires admitting that some of your strengths are also your cages. This is not inspirational. It is destabilizing, and yet, without passing through this destabilization, nothing truly changes, because what you do not integrate, you repeat. What you do not feel, you reenact. What you do not consciously carry, carries you. In the next section, we will explore the consequences of ignoring this truth, how unintegrated trauma quietly shapes relationships, ambition, morality, culture itself. Not dramatically, but insidiously. Not loudly, but persistently. For now, hold on to this realization, even if it unsettles you. Trauma does not ask to be erased. It asks to be understood at the level where it was formed. And understanding, as you are about to see, is far more dangerous and far more liberating than forgetting. The most dangerous effects of trauma are not the ones you notice. They are not the panic attacks, the intrusive memories, the nightmares, or the moments when your chest tightens without warning. Those at least announce themselves. They ask for attention. They hurt loudly. The real consequences work in silence. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that many of the most important choices of your life were not choices at all. They were reactions, reflexes dressed up as preferences, survival strategies masquerading as personality traits. You did not choose your partners as much as your nervous system recognized them. You did not choose your ambitions as much as you fled from helplessness. You did not choose your moral code as much as you tried to stay safe, needed, or invisible. This is the unseen legacy of unintegrated trauma. It begins to live your life for you. Neurologically, this makes perfect sense. The brain evolved not to make you happy, but to keep you alive. Trauma recalibrates this priority system. Danger becomes overrepresented. Neutral becomes suspicious. Calm becomes unfamiliar. Over time, the brain starts filtering reality through threat detection rather than curiosity. You think you are reacting to the present, but you are often responding to echoes. Cognitive biases lock this pattern in place. Confirmation bias ensures you notice evidence that the world is unsafe. Negativity bias gives more weight to pain than pleasure. The availability heuristic makes past danger feel more probable than present safety. None of this feels like distortion from the inside. It feels like wisdom. You tell yourself you are realistic, prepared, not naive anymore. But realism built on trauma is not realism. It is memory projected forward. This projection quietly reshapes relationships first. Trauma teaches you what love costs. If affection once required sacrifice, you overgive. If closeness once led to abandonment, you withhold. If anger once meant danger, you appease. Over time, these patterns create relational ecosystems where imbalance feels normal. You may become the rescuer, mistaking exhaustion for virtue, or the avoidant, mistaking detachment for independence, or the hyper-attuned caretaker, mistaking self-erasure for kindness. None of these roles are chosen consciously. They emerge from an old question still humming beneath your awareness. What do I need to do to stay safe here? The tragedy is that these strategies often recreate the very conditions that caused the trauma in the first place. Overgiving attracts takers. Emotional distance invites misunderstanding. Control provokes rebellion. The psyche then concludes, "See, this is how the world is." And so the loop tightens. But the consequences do not stop at relationships. They seep into ethics, ambition, and identity. Trauma can shape what you believe you deserve. If your nervous system learns scarcity early, abundance feels suspicious. If your needs were ignored, wanting feels shameful. If expressing pain led to punishment, silence feels moral. This is how trauma becomes invisible culture. Entire societies are built on unintegrated wounds. Productivity worships those who learned their worth was conditional. Hustle culture glorifies nervous systems that never learned rest was safe. Self-sacrifice is praised without asking who benefits from it. Aldous Huxley warned that the most effective forms of control are those people come to desire. Trauma ensures compliance without force. You police yourself. You push past limits. You call exhaustion discipline. You call numbness strength. And when your body eventually rebels, you call it weakness. Here lies one of the most devastating consequences. Trauma fractures the relationship between mind and body. The body remembers what the mind explains away. Tension becomes baseline. Fatigue becomes identity. Illness becomes inconvenient rather than informative. You live in a constant low-grade emergency without knowing why. Philosophically, this creates a subtle existential distortion. You begin to confuse safety with meaning, survival with purpose, endurance with virtue. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the denial of one's freedom by hiding behind roles and identities. Trauma creates a somatic version of bad faith. You deny your present reality by obeying past conditions. You say, "This is just how I am," when what you mean is, "This is how I learned to survive." The cost of this denial is creativity, play, spontaneity, risk taken for joy rather than defense. Over time, life becomes narrower, not because you lack opportunity, but because your system cannot imagine safety outside familiar constraints. Even happiness can feel threatening. Moments of calm may trigger anxiety. Stillness may feel empty. Joy may provoke guilt. When pain has been your reference point, peace feels undeserved or temporary. Something must be wrong. So you stay busy, or numb, or distracted. Anything to avoid the silence where unfamiliar sensations might arise. This is the final unseen consequence. Trauma keeps you oriented toward the past even when the present no longer requires it. It steals not only your sense of safety, but your sense of time. You live as if the danger is ongoing, and yet this is not a condemnation. It is a revelation, because what is learned can be unlearned. What is conditioned can be renegotiated. What is unconscious can be brought into relationship with awareness, not erased, not defeated, but integrated. Integration does not mean the past disappears. It means it no longer hijacks the present. But integration demands something radical. You must stop treating trauma as an enemy and start relating to it as information. You must listen to the body rather than override it. You must question virtues that were born from fear. You must allow yourself to feel unsafe in order to learn that you are safe. This is where most people turn back, because this path does not feel like healing at first. It feels like losing control, like dismantling an identity that once protected you. But what waits beyond this dismantling is not chaos. It is choice. In the next section, we will explore how this shift happens, not through force, but through a rebellion against old meanings. A rebellion that does not destroy the self, but frees it from outdated contracts. For now, sit with this truth. Trauma's greatest power is not what it did to you, but how quietly it convinced you that its rules were reality. And reality, as you are about to discover, is far more flexible than your nervous system was ever taught to believe. Every real rebellion begins quietly, not with shouting, not with destruction, but with a moment of internal disobedience, when something inside you whispers, "This can't be the only way to exist." Imagine this moment clearly. You are doing everything right. You are functional, responsible, self-aware. You understand your patterns. You know your trauma. You can explain your past with clinical precision. And yet, something still feels wrong. Not broken, constrained. As if your life operates within invisible borders you never consciously agreed to. This is where rebellion begins, not against the world, but against the unconscious rules you inherited from pain. Because trauma does not only wound, it educates. It teaches you what to expect, what to tolerate, what to avoid, and who you are allowed to be. Over time, these lessons harden into axioms. They stop feeling like adaptations and start feeling like truths. The rebellion starts when you question those truths. What if hyper-independence is not strength, but fear of reliance? What if constant self-sacrifice is not love, but a survival strategy? What if control is not discipline, but a protest against uncertainty? This is not self-blame. This is self-reclamation. Carl Jung believed that what we do not make conscious becomes fate. Rebellion, then, is not about fighting symptoms, it is about interrupting inevitability. It is the refusal to let yesterday keep writing tomorrow. But here is the counterintuitive truth most people resist. You do not break free by trying to feel safe. You break free by expanding your tolerance for discomfort. Trauma trained your nervous system to associate unfamiliar sensations with danger. Healing reverses this logic. It teaches your system that safety can exist inside uncertainty, that discomfort does not equal annihilation, that unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. This is why insight alone is never enough. You can understand your trauma intellectually and still live inside its cage. Freedom begins at the level of experience, not explanation, at the level of the body, not just the mind. Historically, those who broke free from internal prisons did not do so by eliminating fear, but by reinterpreting it. Viktor Frankl, surviving the concentration camps, did not escape suffering. He escaped its absolute authority. He discovered that meaning could exist even when control was stripped away. This is the essence of rebellion, choosing relationship over domination. Trauma says, avoid what hurts. Rebellion asks, what is this pain trying to protect? Trauma says, never need. Rebellion asks, what would happen if I allowed support? Trauma says, stay alert. Rebellion asks, what if rest is not negligence, but intelligence? This is not a soft rebellion, it is psychologically brutal, because it requires you to grieve the identity that once kept you alive. You must acknowledge that parts of you were born in emergency, and thank them before releasing them. Nietzsche warned that one must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. Integration demands this chaos. Old structures collapse, certainties dissolve. You may feel temporarily less functional, less composed, less certain of who you are. This is not regression, it is reorganization. A nervous system recalibrating feels like losing control to a mind addicted to control. You may feel more emotional before you feel stable, more sensitive before you feel grounded, more unsure before you feel free. This is where most people retreat, back to familiar suffering. But rebellion requires endurance. Practically, this rebellion looks deceptively small. It is not dramatic confrontation. It is subtle refusal. You pause instead of pushing. You speak instead of appeasing. You rest instead of proving. You choose differently even when your body protests. You stay present during discomfort instead of escaping it. You allow anxiety to rise without immediately fixing it. You let emotions complete their arc instead of cutting them off mid-sentence. Each time you do this, you send a new message to your nervous system. We survived this. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but honestly. Over time, the body learns what the mind cannot argue into existence, that safety is not the absence of threat, but the presence of capacity. This is the deepest shift, from safety as control to safety as resilience. You stop asking, how do I avoid pain? You start asking, how do I stay with myself when pain arises? This is how power returns, not as domination over life, but as partnership with it. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that freedom is terrifying because it makes us responsible for our meaning. Trauma steals this responsibility by convincing you that you have no choice. Rebellion restores it, not by erasing limits, but by redefining them. You are no longer ruled by the past. You are informed by it. This changes everything. Your relationships begin to shift because you are no longer negotiating from fear. Your boundaries stop being walls and start being expressions. Your compassion deepens, not because you abandon yourself, but because you finally include yourself. Even your pain transforms. It becomes signal rather than sentence, information rather than identity. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world feels different, wider, less urgent, less hostile, not because it changed, but because you did. Yet there is one final truth that completes this transformation, one realization that rearranges everything you thought healing was about. It is uncomfortable, it is humbling, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. In the final section, we will arrive at this truth, not as a conclusion, but as a beginning. A truth that reframes trauma not as something to overcome, but as something that can become a source of depth, coherence, and strange, quiet power. For now, remember this. Rebellion is not becoming someone new. It is withdrawing obedience from the rules that no longer serve your survival. And that withdrawal, gentle, relentless, embodied, is how freedom actually begins. Here is the truth most people spend their entire lives running from. Trauma is not something you defeat. It is something you carry differently. Imagine this. You wake up one day and realize the question that has driven you for years, when will I finally be healed? No longer makes sense. Not because the pain is gone, but because the framework has collapsed. The war narrative ends. The obsession with fixing yourself dissolves. And in its place, something quieter, heavier, and strangely relieving appears. Acceptance, not resignation, but recognition. The deepest illusion trauma creates is the belief that there exists a version of you untouched by it, a clean self, an original state to return to. This belief fuels endless self-improvement, endless therapy, endless comparison. You are always chasing a ghost of who you should have been. But that person never existed. You were shaped in contact with reality, and reality includes rupture. The final realization is this: integration is not healing's consolation prize, it is healing's completion. Integration means the past no longer hijacks the present, but it also no longer needs to be erased. It means the wound stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher, not a romanticized one, not a sacred badge, but a source of information about your nervous system, your values, your limits, your humanity. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of the psyche, but by embracing them. Trauma fragments. Integration reunifies. This is where the paradox tightens. The traits you tried to eliminate, hypervigilance, emotional sensitivity, intensity, distrust, are not pathologies in themselves. They are adaptations, frozen intelligence, survival strategies that outlived the context that created them. The tragedy is not that they exist. The tragedy is that they remain unconscious. When integrated, these traits transform. Hypervigilance becomes discernment. Sensitivity becomes attunement. Intensity becomes depth. Caution becomes wisdom. But only if you stop trying to outgrow them and start learning how to relate to them. This is why people who overcome trauma often feel hollow. They amputate parts of themselves in the name of normalcy. They function better but feel less alive. They are regulated but disconnected. Integration refuses this trade-off. It allows contradiction. You can be strong and scarred, calm and vigilant, open and boundaried. Trauma does not disappear. It finds its rightful place in the architecture of the self. This realization is unsettling because it removes the finish line. There is no day where you graduate from being human. There is only increasing coherence. Viktor Frankl said that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. Integration does not justify pain, but it prevents pain from being wasted. It allows your history to inform your ethics, your empathy, your choices. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" You start asking, "What does this ask of me now?" And that question changes how you live. You stop chasing emotional perfection. You stop performing resilience. You stop proving that you are okay. Instead, you become honest. Honest about your limits. Honest about your triggers. Honest about your needs. And paradoxically, this honesty creates safety, not because nothing hurts anymore, but because nothing is denied. The nervous system relaxes when it no longer has to lie. This is the final shift, from self-improvement to self-coherence. You are no longer split between who you are and who you think you should be. The inner civil war ends. Energy once spent on suppression becomes available for creation, connection, presence. Life does not become painless, but it becomes real. And here is the quietest, most radical truth of all. When trauma is integrated, it no longer defines you, but it does deepen you. It gives weight to your words, gravity to your compassion, precision to your boundaries. You recognize suffering without being consumed by it. You can sit with others in pain without trying to rescue or flee. You become trustworthy, to yourself and to others. This is why integration feels like maturity rather than triumph. There is no fireworks, no victory speech, just a steady sense of alignment. You are no longer running from your past. You are no longer living inside it. You are in conversation with it, and that conversation continues, not as a wound reopening, but as a dialogue that keeps you honest, awake, and human. The ultimate truth is not inspirational. It is stabilizing. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to erase what happened. You do not need to move on in the way culture demands. You need to stay with yourself, with your body, with your story, without letting it harden into identity or dissolve into denial. That is integration. And once you understand this, something subtle but irreversible happens. You stop asking for permission to be whole. You already are.